Section 33 of the Ego and His Own. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Ego and His Own by Max Stirner. My Intercourse, Part 10. Sigismund is not a miserable caitiff because he broke his princely word, but he broke the word because he was a caitiff. He might have kept his word, and would still have been a caitiff, a priest-ridden man. Luther, driven by a higher power, became unfaithful to his monastic vow. He became so for God's sake. Both broke their oath as possessed persons. Sigismund, because he wanted to appear as a sincere professor of the divine truth, i.e., of the true, genuinely Catholic faith. Luther, in order to give testimony for the gospel sincerely and with entire truth. With body and soul, both became perjured in order to be sincere toward the higher truth. Only the priests absolved the one, the other absolved himself. What else did both observe than what is contained in those apostolic words, "Thou hast not lied to men, but to God"? They lied to men, broke their oath before the world's eyes, in order not to lie to God, but to serve him. Thus they show us a way to deal with truth before men, for God's glory and for God's sake. A breach of oath, a lie, a prince's word broken. How would it be, now, if we changed the thing a little and wrote, "A perjury and lie for my sake"? Would not that be pleading for every baseness? It seems so, assuredly, only in this it is altogether like the "for God's sake." For was not every baseness committed for God's sake? Were not all the scaffolds filled for his sake, and all the auster de fe held for his sake? Was not all stupefaction introduced for his sake? And do they not today still for God's sake fetter the mind in tender children by religious education? Were not sacred vows broken for his sake? And do not missionaries and priests still go around every day to bring Jews, heathen, Protestants, or Catholics to treason against the faith of their fathers for his sake? And that should be worse with the "for my sake." What then does "on my account" mean? There people immediately think of filthy lucre, but he who acts from love of filthy lucre does it on his own account indeed, as there is nothing anyhow that one does not do for his own sake. Among other things, everything that is done for God's glory, yet he, for whom he seeks the lucre, is a slave of lucre, not raised above lucre. He is one who belongs to lucre, the money bag not to himself. He is not his own. Must not a man whom the passion of avarice rules follow the commands of his master? And if a weak good-naturedness once beguiles him, does this not appear as simply an exceptional case of precisely the same sort as when pious believers are sometimes forsaken by their Lord's guidance and ensnared by the arts of the devil? So an avaricious man is not a self-owned man, but a servant, and he can do nothing for his own sake without at the same time doing it for his Lord's sake, precisely like the godly man. Famous is the breach of oath which Francis I committed against Emperor Charles V, not later, when he rightly weighed his promise, but at once when he swore the oath. King Francis took it back in thought as well as by a secret protestation documentarily subscribed before his councillors. He uttered a perjury afterthought. Francis did not show himself disinclined to buy his release, but the price that Charles put on it seemed to him too high and unreasonable. Even though Charles behaved himself in a sordid fashion when he sought to extort as much as possible, it was yet shabby of Francis to want to purchase his freedom for a lower ransom, and his later dealings, among which there occurs yet a second breach of his word, proved sufficiently how the huckster spirit led him enthralled and made him a shabby swindler. However, what shall we say to the reproach of perjury against him? In the first place, surely, this again, that not the perjury, but his sordidness, ashamed him, that he did not deserve contempt for his perjury, but made himself guilty of perjury, because he was a contemptible man. But Francis' perjury, regarded in itself, demands another judgment. One might say Francis did not respond to the confidence that Charles put in him in setting him free. But if Charles had really favoured him with confidence, he would have named to him the price that he considered the release worth, and would then have set him at liberty, and expected Francis to pay the redemption sum. Charles harboured no such trust, but only believed in Francis's impotence and prodigality, which would not allow him to act against his oath. But Francis deceived only this credulous calculation. When Charles believed he was assuring himself of his enemy by an oath, right there he was freeing him from every obligation. Charles had given the king credit for a piece of stupidity, a narrow conscience, and without confidence in Francis, counted only on Francis's stupidity, e.g. conscientiousness. He let him go from the Madrid prison, only to hold him the more securely in the prison of conscientiousness, the great jail built about the mind of man by religion. He sent him back to France, locked fast in invisible chains. What wonder if Francis sought to escape and sawed the chains apart? No man would have taken it amiss of him if he had secretly fled from Madrid, for he was in an enemy's power. But every good Christian cries out upon him that he wanted to loose himself from God's bonds too. It was only later that the Pope absolved him from his oath. It is despicable to deceive a confidence that we voluntarily called forth, but it is no shame to egoism to let every one who wants to get us into his power by an oath bleed to death by the failure of his untrustful craft. If you have wanted to bind me, then learn that I know how to burst your bonds. The point is whether I give the confider the right to confidence. If the pursuer of my friend asks me where he had fled to, I shall surely put him on a false trail. Why does he ask precisely me, the pursued man's friend? In order not to be a false, treacherous friend, I prefer to be false to the enemy. I might certainly, in courageous conscientiousness, answer, I will not tell. So Fichte decides the case. By that I should salve my love of truth, and do for my friend as much as nothing. For, if I do not mislead the enemy, he may accidentally take the right street, and my love of truth would have given up my friend as a prey, because it hindered me from the courage for a lie. He who has in the truth an idol, a sacred thing, must humble himself before it, must not defy its commands, not resist courageously. In short, he must renounce the heroism of the lie, for to the lie belongs not less courage than to the truth, a courage that young men are most apt to be deficient in, who would rather confess the truth and mount the scaffold for it than confound the enemy's power by the impudence of a lie. To them the truth is sacred, and the sacred at all times demands blind reverence, submission, and self-sacrifice. If you are not impudent, not mockers of the sacred, You are tame and its servants. Let one but lay a grain of truth in the trap for you. You peck at it to a certainty, and the fool is caught. You will not lie? Well then, fall as sacrifices to the truth and become martyrs. Martyrs? For what? For yourselves? For self-ownership? No, for your goodness, the truth. You know only two services, only two kinds of servants, servants of the truth and servants of the lie. Then, in God's name, serve the truth. Others again serve the truth also, but they serve it in moderation, and make, e.g., a great distinction between a simple lie and a lie sworn to. And yet the whole chapter of the oath coincides with that of the lie, since an oath, everybody knows, is only a strongly assured statement. You consider yourselves entitled to lie, if only you do not swear to it besides. One who is particular about it must judge and condemn a lie as sharply as a false oath. But now there has been kept up in morality an ancient point of controversy, which is customarily treated of under the name of the lie of necessity. No one who dares plead for this can conscientiously put it from an oath of necessity. If I justify my lie as a lie of necessity, I should not be so presumptuous as to rob the justified lie of the strongest corroboration. Whatever I do, why should I not do it entirely and without reservations, reservatio de mentalis? If I once lie, why then not lie completely, with entire consciousness and all my might? As a spy, I should have to swear to each of my false statements at the enemy's demand. Determined to lie to him, should I suddenly become cowardly and undecided in face of an oath, then I should have been ruined in advance for a liar and spy, for, you see, I should be voluntarily putting into the enemy's hand a means to catch me. The state too fears the oath of necessity, and for this reason does not give the accused a chance to swear. But you do not justify the state's fear. You lie, but do not swear falsely. If, e.g., you show someone a kindness, and he is not to know it, but he guesses it and tells you so to your face, you deny. If he insists, you say honestly no. If it came to swearing, then you would refuse, for from fear of the sacred we always stop halfway. Against the sacred you have no will of your own. You lie in moderation, as you are free in moderation, religious in moderation. The clergy are not to encroach. Over this point the most rapid of controversies is now being carried on the part of the university against the church. Monarchically disposed in moderation, you want a monarch limited by the constitution, by a fundamental law of the state. Everything nicely tempered, lukewarm, half gods, half the devils. There was a university where the usage was that every word of honour that must be given to the university judge was looked upon by the students as null and void, for the students saw in the demanding it nothing but a snare, which they could not escape otherwise than by taking away all its significance. He who at that same university broke his word of honour to one of the fellows was infamous. He who gave it to the university judge derided, in union with these very fellows, the dupe who fancied that a word had the same value among friends and among foes. It was less a correct theory than the constraint of practice that had there taught the students to act so, as without that means of getting out they would have been pitilessly driven to treachery against their comrades. But as the means approved itself in practice, so it has its theoretical probation too. A word of honour, an oath, is one only for him whom I entitled to receive it. He who forces me to it obtains only a forced, i.e., a hostile word, the word of a foe, whom one has no right to trust, for the foe does not give us the right. Aside from this, the courts of the state do not even recognize the inviolability of an oath. For if I had sworn to one who comes under examination that I would not declare anything against him, the court would demand my declaration in spite of the fact that an oath binds me, and in case of refusal would lock me up till I decided to become an oath breaker. The court absolves me from my oath. How magnanimous! If any power can absolve me from the oath, I myself am surely the very first power that has a claim to. As a curiosity, and to remind us of customary oaths of all sorts, let place be given here to that which Emperor Paul commanded the captured Poles, Kosciuszko, Potocki, Niemoussi, and others, to take when he replaced them. We not merely swear fidelity and obedience to the Emperor, but also further promise to pour out our blood for his glory. We obligate ourselves to discover everything threatening to his person or his empire that we ever learn. We declare finally that in whatever part of the earth we may be, a single word of the Emperor shall suffice to make us leave everything and repair to him at once. In one domain, the principle of love seems to have been long outsoared by egoism, and to be still in need only of sure consequence, as it were of victory, with a good conscience. This domain is speculation, in its double manifestation as thinking and as trade. One thinks with a will, whatever may come of it. One speculates, however many may suffer under our speculative undertakings. But when it finally becomes serious, when even the last remnant of religiousness, romance, or humanity is to be done away, then the pulse of religious conscience beats, and one at least professes humanity. The voracious spectacular throws some coppers into the poor box and does good. The bold thinker consoles himself with the fact that he is working for the advancement of the human race, and that his devastation turns to the good of mankind, or, in another case, that he is serving the idea, mankind. The idea is to him that something of which he must say, "It is more to me than myself." To this day thinking and trading have been done for God's sake. Those who for 6 days were trampling down everything by their selfish aims sacrificed on the 7th to the Lord, and those who destroyed 100 good causes by their reckless thinking still did this in the service of another good cause, and had yet to think of another besides themselves, to whose good their self-indulgence should turn, of the people, mankind, etc. But this other thing is a being above them, a higher or supreme being, and therefore I say they are toiling for God's sake. Hence I can also say that the ultimate basis of their actions is love, not a voluntary love, however, not their own, but a tributary love, or the higher being's own, God's, who himself is love. In short, not the egoistic, but the religious, a love that springs from their fancy that they must discharge a tribute of love, i.e., that they must not be egoists. If we want to deliver the world from many kinds of unfreedom, we want this not on its account, but on ours, for as we are not world liberators by profession and out of love, we only want to win it away from others. We want to make it our own. It is not to be any longer owned as serf by God, the Church, nor by the law, state, but to be our own. Therefore we seek to win it, to captivate it, and by meeting it halfway and devoting ourselves to it as to ourselves as soon as it belongs to us, to complete and make superfluous the force that it turns against us. If the world is ours, it no longer attempts any force against us, but only with us. My selfishness has an interest in the liberation of the world, that it may become my property. Not isolation or being alone, but society is man's original state. Our existence begins with the most intimate conjunction, as we are already living with our mother before we breathe. When we see the light of the world, we at once lie on a human being's breast again. Her love cradles us in the lap, leads us in the go-cart, and chains us to her person with 1,000 ties. Society is our state of nature, and this is why, the more we learn to feel ourselves, the connection that was formerly most intimate becomes ever looser, and the dissolution of the original society more unmistakable. To have once again for herself the child that once lay under her heart, the mother must fetch it from the street and from the midst of its playmates. The child prefers the intercourse that it enters into with its fellows to the society that it has not entered into, but only been born in. But the dissolution of society is intercourse or union. A society does assuredly arise by union too, but only as a fixed idea arises by a thought, to wit, by the vanishing of the energy of the thought, the thinking itself, thus restless taking back all sorts that make themselves fast from the thought. If a union has crystallized into a society, it has ceased to be a coalition, for coalition is an incessant self-uniting. It has become a unitedness, come to a standstill, degenerated into a fixity. It is dead as a union. It is the corpse of the union or the coalition, i.e., it is society community. A striking example of this kind is furnished by the party. That a society, e.g., the society of the state, diminishes my liberty offends me little. Why, I have to let my liberty be limited by all sorts of powers and by every one who is stronger, nay, by every fellow man. And were I the autocrat of all the I yet should not enjoy absolute liberty. But onus I will not have taken from me, and onus is precisely what every society has designs on, precisely what is to succumb to its power. A society which I join does indeed take from me many liberties, but in return it affords me other liberties. Neither does it matter if I myself deprive myself of this and that liberty, e.g., by any contract. On the other hand, I want to hold jealously to my ownness. Every community has the propensity, stronger or weaker according to the fullness of its power, to become an authority to its members and to set limits for them. It asks, and must ask, for a subject's limited understanding. It asks that those who belong to it be subjected to it, be its subjects. It exists only by subjection. In this a certain tolerance need by no means be excluded. On the contrary, the society will welcome improvements, corrections, and blame, so far as such are calculated for its gain. But the blame must be well-meaning. It may not be insolent and disrespectful. In other words, one must leave uninjured, and hold sacred, the substance of the society. The society demands that those who belong to it shall not go beyond it, and exalt themselves, but remain within the bounds of legality, e.g., allow themselves only so much as the society and its law allow them. there is a difference whether my liberty or my ownness is limited by a society. If the former only is the case, it is a coalition, an agreement, a union. But if ruin is threatened to ownness, it is a power of itself, a power above me, a thing unattainable by me, which I can indeed admire, adore, reverence, respect, but cannot subdue and consume, and that for the reason that I am resigned, it exists by my resignation, my self-renunciation, my spiritlessness, called humility. My humility makes it courage, my submissiveness gives it dominion. But in reference to liberty, state and union are subject to no essential difference. The latter can just as little come into existence or continue in existence, without liberties being limited in all sorts of ways. As the state is compatible with unmeasured liberty, limitation of liberty is inevitable everywhere, for one cannot get rid of everything. One cannot fly like a bird merely because one would like to fly. So, for one does not get free from his own weight. One cannot live under water as long as he likes, like a fish, because one cannot do without air, and cannot get free from this indispensable necessity, etc. As religion, and most decidedly Christianity, tormented men with the demand to realize the unnatural and self-contradictory, so it is to be looked upon only as the true logical outcome of that religious overstraining and overwrougtness that finally liberty itself, absolute liberty, was exalted into an ideal, and thus the nonsense of the impossible to come glaringly into the light. The union will assuredly offer a greater measure of liberty, as well as, and especially because, by it one escapes all the coercion peculiar to state and society life. Admit of being considered as a new liberty, but nevertheless it will still contain enough of unfreedom and involuntariness, for its object is not this liberty, which, on the contrary, it sacrifices to ownness, but only ownness. Referred to this, the difference between state and union is great enough. The former is an enemy and murderer of ownness, the latter a son and co-worker of it. The former a spirit that would be adored in spirit and in truth, the latter my work, my product. The state is the lord of my spirit, who demands faith, and prescribes to me articles of faith, the creed of legality. It exerts moral influence, dominates my spirit, drives away my ego to put itself in its place as my true ego. In short, the state is sacred, and as against me, the individual man, it is the true man, the spirit, the ghost. But the union is my own creation, my creature, not sacred, not a spiritual power above my spirit, as little as any association of whatever sort. As I am not willing to be a slave of my maxims, but lay them bare to my continual criticism without any warrant, and admit no bail at all for their persistence, so still less do I obligate myself to the union for my future, and pledge my soul to it, as is said to be done with the devil, and is really the case with the state, and all spiritual authority. But I am, and remain, more to myself than state, church, God, etc. Consequently, infinitely more than the union too. End of section 33. Recording by Elaine Webb, Bristol, England.